Welcome to the History of European Theatre podcast, and thanks for joining me on this journey through millennia of theatrical history. Episode 136, Words, Language and Actions in Titus Andronicus, a conversation with Eleanor Conlon. Having given you my own thoughts on Titus Andronicus last time, I'm pleased to say that for this special guest episode, I was able to take the discussion even further with Eleanor Conlon, a fellow podcaster and a theatre professional. When I first made contact with Eleanor, I was surprised to hear how keen she was to talk about Titus Andronicus. After all, very few people would, I think, list it as one of their favourite Shakespeare plays. But as you will hear, Eleanor has a lot to say about the play, and insights that, in some cases, go in different directions from what I was able to say about the play. I certainly enjoyed my conversation with Eleanor, and I hope that you too enjoy hearing more about Titus Andronicus. But to begin with, I asked Eleanor to tell us about her podcast, co-produced and co-presented with Martin Vaux, called The Three Ravens Podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Three Ravens podcast is a history and folklore podcast in which we tour around the 39 historic counties of England, exploring the history and folklore from each specific county. And each week we discover the folk tales and folk legends from the area and retell one of the stories in our style. And we've also got bonus episodes where we explore folk magic and medicine, a bestiary where we look at fantastical creatures throughout historical literature and legend, a Something Wicked episode, which is sort of historical and folkloric true crime, and one that focuses on traditional crafts, dying arts, that's called.
There's a huge scope that you cover, although you've set yourself the limits of the English counties, but within that, there's an enormous
at the moment, and we're on our second round. We've been round once, all the 39, and we're going round again at the moment.
So plenty to dig into still.
Definitely.
There's always a good story to tell. But you've got many other strings to your bow, haven't you?
Yes, so I run a theatre company, Rust and Stardust, which is primarily a puppetry and visual theatre company inspired by folklore, but we produce original work as well as some adaptations. We have a Puppet Tempest, which appeals to Shakespeare fans, and we tour all around the UK doing various events and festivals and things like that.
Okay, great. We'll put some links to all of that in the show notes so everyone can come and look you up and see what you're doing next. When we got in touch, you let me know that Titus Andronicus was one of your favourite Shakespeare plays, which wasn't what I expected somebody to be telling me. So perhaps we start there. Why is it one of your favourites?
Unusual favourite. I think it's actually quite rich, and this chat may turn into a defence of Titus Andronicus in a way. It's a play which is often apologised for. It's often put down to Shakespeare's youthful inexperience.
Yeah.
It's been called crude, it's been called badly written, it's been called gratuitous in its violence. T.S. Eliot, who's a writer I generally respect and agree with on many things, called it one of the stupidest and most uninspired plays ever written, which I think is quite unfair. It's very harsh. It's also one of those plays which is centred in a never-ending authorship controversy. So many of Shakespeare's plays are, but Titus in particular has been pulled apart by people looking to attribute different authorial hands to it, which is quite interesting. And in a way, I think that may be because people are keen to disassociate Shakespeare with Titus, perhaps because the subject matter is shocking. The visual imagery we see on stage is very shocking. It comes with a lot of press hype, this play. Like, the thing people remember about Titus Andronicus is it's gory. They'll think, Titus, it's the one where people get eaten in a pie.
Yep.
That's what people take away from it. It comes with this incredible press hype around it. Like, one of the selling points for Lucy Bailey's production at the Globe a few years ago was that audience members were fainting at the show. And that may have been something to do with the fact the designer had chosen to emulate a Roman velarium and close in the roof of the Globe with black mesh on a really hot summer's day. But that wasn't what carried through into the press. It was, this production is so shocking that you will faint when you see it. So it's got a lot of hype attached to it without people necessarily thinking much about the drama and the language and the way the play is constructed. It was a hot ticket, and I think it would have been even in the 1590s, it would have been a hot ticket. Because, I mean, it's important to consider the context of it. It's not a closet drama. It is commercial theatre, which relies on spectacle, and it sits firmly within the tradition of the Rose spectaculars of the 1580s and 90s. Marlowe's Tamburlaine plays, works of Kidd and Green, which are actually just as bad. You're seeing some pretty awful things in the Spanish tragedy, and Salamis by Green is super bloody and horrible. And these were notorious and popular because of that brand of violent sensationalism. And we know that theatre at the time was capable of staging spectacle wonderfully well. I think we think, they didn't have prosthetics and technology like we have to produce those effects today. They had loads of special effects. I mean, we've got Henslow's diary, which gives us this intriguing list of properties in that company's possession, which were likely used and reused for various things. My favourite one's got to be either a hell mouth for Dr. Faustus, spelt in one of Henslow's inimitable ways, or the brazen head, which we know was used in a couple of Green plays. Like, obviously, they had this brazen head prop that breathed fire and spoke, and thought, well, we've got it now, might as well reuse it. So I think it would have been an event, even at the time. And that automatically attracts me. I'm intrigued by that. I want to know why people enjoyed it so much.
Yes, I suppose if this had been a Marlowe play and part of his canon, we wouldn't think of it in the same way. It would just be another Marlowe play. Indeed, I saw it called a pastiche of Marlowe.
Yes, and that is interesting, isn't it, to consider that. I think possibly pastiche is a good word to consider there, because, I mean, the authorship controversy around this play, you can get very bogged down in it, and loads of wonderful work has been done to create databases analysing verse structure and frequency of words, and you can get really involved in this. But I think it's important to consider the environment it's written in. It is really difficult to discover a unique authorial voice at this time. Like, playwriting and play production in early modern London is this hotbed of shared ideas. It's conversations. You've got writers picking up themes and running with them from other writers. And writers regularly write sequels or continuations of each other's plays. I mean, look, you've just talked about The Taming of the Shrew, and then we've got Fletcher's The Tamer Tamed, which is a direct response using the same characters. Fletcher obviously not very happy with the ending of The Taming of the Shrew, or thought, I wonder what happened next. So wrote a play about it, which was staged and was a commercial success. They had references to other people's work across their text. There's just kind of glorious mesh of intertextuality, which I think makes it quite difficult to detect responsibility, or whether he's going, I loved it when Marlowe did that, so I'm just going to pop a bit of that in there. This responds to Kidd. Here's my take on it. Here's this theme which I'm going to subvert slightly. And when you think of an audience, audiences love things like that. There's a reason we seek out media which is the same type of media that we already like.
We all get caught in the algorithms that tell us what we like these days.
Yes, and I think around these sort of Rose Theatre spectaculars, there was a bit of an algorithm. People sought out things that they liked to watch. And it didn't go anywhere for quite a long time. Like, we roll well into the height of Jacobean tragedy with Middleton and Webster continuing to produce such works and even becoming slightly associated with such works, although Middleton actually wrote more city comedies than brutal tragedies, but he's become sort of attached to these very bloody tragedies.
So perhaps in the same way we watch true crime or Scandi noir, they liked to watch revenge tragedy.
Yeah, I think so. And, the Elizabethan world was used to seeing things like this. Like, they often featured these tragedies, sites of horrific violence, but that wasn't confined to the playhouse. They would see things like that performed live on scaffolds. Like, public executions were still really common. Like, the spectacle of live execution compares pretty closely with the tragedies of blood we see on the popular stage. They were familiar with it. And perhaps it's a bit of a stretch to compare these plays to contemporary spectacles like big budget musical theatre, but they do occupy a similar space in mass culture, because there are the things which attract people who've got that sort of spurious interest in them, despite, Titus contains loads of classical allusions which would appeal to the cultivated and the educated as well.
Both Marlowe and Shakespeare are filled with classical allusion, which they seem to have an expectation that people will understand. And I guess one of the big unknowns is for us is what percentage of the audience would have got those references or not.
Yes. And I think, a percentage, but not all of them. I think it's quite, there were lots of richer and more educated people attending the Playhouse who would have absolutely gone, oh, I recognise that reference from Livy or Seneca, or Ovid. Metamorphosis is obviously a big influence on some of the themes within Titus. Yeah, so I think it's little tidbits, it's Easter eggs for those who know, but you can sort of enjoy the drama without really picking up on any of those. I mean, he directly tells us, Lavinia is referred to as Philomela with a Tereus. We get told this story is like the one in Metamorphosis. So even if you haven't read that or encountered that, if you're not literate, you'll still sort of go, oh, okay, I think that's something I might have heard of.
And would you say she's the most interesting character once we get underneath all that blood and violence?
Is she the most interesting character? She occupies an interesting place within the play. I think Lavinia is more of a symbol, isn't she, rather than a very well-drawn human woman. We see her as representative of the Andronici body politic. Like, she sort of is the honor of her family, and honor is such a big theme in this play. Like, the word honor is used, I think, possibly nearly 60 times in the play, right, in its various permutations. And Lavinia very much represents the family honor that has been violated. Mm-hmm. She belongs to her father. When she's attacked, it's referred to as a rape in the sense of Latin ravere, which means of seizure. She's a piece of property that has been seized or annexed into somebody else's care. And she fills a specific function, I think, rather than developing independently. We don't see enough of her to really understand her as a person. We get the sense that she quite likes Bassianus, but that's about it, really, for Lavinia. She's just a feminine personification of the symbolic masculine honor of her family, which is otherwise entirely composed of loads of men. And her violation it's symbolic of the humiliation and destruction of the Andronici as an institution.
Which feeds into that whole image of Rome that Shakespeare creates in this play, a sort of pseudo-Rome, really.
Yes, the Rome that is in the play is not a real Rome. It's a fictional Rome which combines multiple aspects of Roman history and folklore. And I mean, just from the point of classical sources, the play is such a rich vein to mine. We've got allusions to Ovid's Metamorphosis, Livy, Seneca's play Thyestes, the Rape of Lucretia, which we know was the subject Shakespeare returned to in his long poem, The Rape of Lucrece. And Seneca's play Thyestes is actually the origin of the pie moment. Shakespeare doesn't come up with the pie moment. And I think it's also possible to see echoes of Sophocles and Greek tragedy. The ending of the play feels to me like the beginning of Sophocles' Antigone. The Tamara's body is thrown outside the city walls. Her body's returned to the natural world, which you can read as a kind of organic ritual, but she's not receiving burial rites. And that starts off the whole contention of Antigone.
Yes.
And there's a sense that the cycle is being perpetuated yet again with that. And Titus is a play about cycles anyway, and how violence begets violence, language begets action, action does violence to language, and it goes round and round and round. But with Rome, I mean, Elizabethans, when they thought about Rome, thought about it is synonymous with civilization. That the idea of Rome was to be civilized. The Senate, the way the society was structured, was civilization. And I think this play is a real comment on the dangers of improper governance. Saturninus is an inappropriate emperor. He's incapable of managing that society. We're told that a new emperor is going to put a head on headless Rome. But then the state is sort of systematically taken apart. And by the end of the play, the Goths are at the gates again. The state is locked, its limbs are locked, its children are devoured. The same thing happens to Titus's family. But we see it through family drama. We haven't really got many members of the Roman public. There's a little bit at the end and a bit at the beginning with the two brothers where you might see the public. But many directors of the play have chosen, if they've shown the people of Rome at all, which you can get away without doing, to portray them as faceless and voiceless. It's sort of this comment, which I think Shakespeare returns to as a theme of if the head of state is rotten, the whole state suffers.
There's an outsider here as well, isn't there? Herrin the Moor.
Oh, what a great character. One of my favourite characters across Shakespeare, actually, which we don't often hear of him. We hear a lot when we list Shakespeare's villains. Herrin rarely pops up on the list.
Yeah.
But I think in that character, we get to see Shakespeare playing with tropes, as he does so brilliantly with other examples of outsiders or other people in his plays. I mean, we're told some pretty bad things about Herrin within the play, some pretty unequivocal racist comments about him, and including the things he says about himself. But you get the sense there's a sort of wry knowingness to the things he says about himself. When he dies, he says, I wish I'd done 10,000 more bad things in my time. I regret having not been worse. But I don't know if we necessarily believe that, or if that's a sort of last shout of defiance in the face of what's happened to him. But then at the same time, Herrin's sexy, he's educated, he's able to move between spheres and interact at different levels with different groups of people. He subverts a lot of the tropes that we see of Moors or black and brown characters on the stage at this period. One of the really interesting things about him is his role as a father. Herrin and his baby are together for quite a lot of the latter part of the play. He's capable of love and sacrifice. He says, kill me, but don't kill my child. And he also directly stands on stage and confronts the problematic values of the time concerning race. At 4 Scene 1, he says, is black so base a hue? And that's quite startling for an Elizabethan audience to hear. And he goes on to say, lovely things that we say to our children, you're a beauteous blossom, he calls his baby, and he keeps asserting that his child has royal blood, and he's willing to fight for this prince who he's going to be. Which is so interesting. Of course, Shakespeare does this again with Richard III. Richard III's historically got a bad rep, but the Richard we see in Shakespeare's Richard III is very appealing. He's very beguiling to an audience. If you don't come out of Richard III slightly fancying Richard III, what's the production doing? And then we've got Othello. We're told again, he's a Moor, he's savage, but Othello is a storyteller capable of drawing people in with the seductive power of his imagination. And we're also directly confronted, aren't we, with Shylock in The Merchant of Venice when he says, hath not a Jew eyes? It's like Shakespeare sort of turning, it's that breaking the fourth wall wasn't there in that period, of course, but it is turning and saying, okay, what about that perception that you have of people? You
can absolutely see Herrin standing up with those other characters when you put it like that. And I mean, hindsight's wonderful, but you can't help think of Othello when you see some of the lines that Herrin has, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he definitely confronts blackness and what it's like to exist as a black character in a white world, doesn't he? Which Othello obviously explicitly confronts too. And I mean, Herrin is he's a character that is subject to a lot of analysis and rewrite. So we know, I mean, you're in Shakespeare's zone at the moment, but when you get into the 18th and 19th centuries, often rewrites and adaptations did immense violence to Shakespeare, which I think is kind of ironic in this play, but given its thematic connection with lopping of limbs, how lopped about this play is kind of wild. But an 1850 version created by the black actor and entrepreneur in theatre, Ira Aldridge, featured Herrin as a heroic character with a heroic arc, who escaped at the end of the play with his baby into a hopeful future, which I think is quite astounding as a rewrite, really. And so the Andronici are all dead, the family of Rome are all dead, and Herrin's off into the sunset, which is quite excellent. Of course, in that version, it being 1850, he was just Tamara's special friend rather than her lover. But so not quite sure how the baby came about in the first place there. And there it was, which I think is quite startling, really. And that ending, I think productions can really afford to play there with the taste they leave in the audience's collective mouth. At the end of the play, we've got Lucius and young Lucius left with Aaron and Tamara's baby, the mixed race child, on stage. And the director then has to make a decision about what to do with this baby. We're not actually told in the stage directions what happens at all.
No.
And the baby, when we see a baby, it's a universal symbol of hope for the future, isn't it? There's a Julie Taymor production of Titus on Broadway, which at the end had Lucius killing the baby, which is a very dark place to leave your audience in.
Yes.
However, when she later came to make her film adaptation, Titus, which I think is 2010s with Anthony Hopkins, the actor playing Lucius worked with her, and they ended up keeping the baby alive in that version.
Oh, right.
So it's a much more hopeful ending. Yeah. So she initially hadn't wanted to, because she wanted to make a point about the perpetuation of cycles of violence. But the actor said, no, I don't feel this is right for my portrayal of this character, and we're going to keep the baby alive, which is an important choice to see how the events we've witnessed has affected what's going to happen next. Like, is it catharsis? Have we learned from the mistakes of the past, or are we firmly trapped?
Yes, well, in my episode, I was speculating that the character of young Lucius was used in many modern productions to do exactly that. Although I suspect that originally he was probably more there to perpetuate the cycle rather than end it.
Yes, I think so. I think it is definitely possible to take a rather negative and depressing reading of the end, but it's almost sort of proto-Brechtian in that sense, as it leaves it in the audience's hands. It says, okay, take that away. What are you going to do with it? What do you take? What have we learned? What do you take from that? Which is very interesting, I think. I mean, it's a fascinating play. And of course, it is criticised for its violence and its grotesquerie. But I think it's one of the most effective things about the play, the way language is used within it. It's very purposeful. It's not random acts of violence at all. There is a real reason for Shakespeare choosing the words he chooses in writing this play. Yes, it's a revenge tragedy drawing on classical themes, but it's crafted. It's got a definite style, uses thematically appropriate language and linguistic motifs which recur and recur throughout. I think, the revenge tragedy as a subgenre is really suited to stylization in language and action. We get so many sort of extravagant set pieces, performances of ritual, dumb shows, masks, references to Greek tragedy, which go above and beyond the place Greek tragedy was able to go. We see this in kids' Spanish tragedy, the sort of originator of play within a play. It's a very extravagant revenge set piece plotted by these wronged characters. And this goes on, we see this in Middleton's Women Beware Women. We see it in Webster, Duchess of Malfi, with this sort of mad people and waxwork hands. It really demonstrates the horror, differing to Greek tragedy, where, of course, we don't see anything. We just get the chorus coming on stage to tell us what's happened.
Yes.
Whereas we really get to see it. And this tragedy in this period makes such use of the human body as an expressive medium to show the story. And Shakespeare's using that within the text. So we get this combination of wordplay and the aesthetics, which creates a really unique dramatic language, I think, which acknowledges that words and actions and tropes within the play are intimately connected. The violence and the grotesquerie are used as metaphors for political, sexual, moral, psychological collapse and devaluation. And I'm so interested in human bodies in this play, the ways they're represented, the meanings they can produce, and how the treatment of that horror is resolved. I think that's one of the key merits of this tragedy. There is technical subtlety in the use of words and imagery, even if some of the violent acts rather bludgeon you over the head. And the horror remains immediate and crucial, I think, because of those thematic unities between linguistics and aesthetics, that words and deeds get brought together and effectively express tragedy. And yeah, its linguistic motifs are really hard to separate from live performance, I think. Reading this play is a strange experience. It is not a closet drama. It is not intended to be read. It is intended to be viewed as a spectacle, because performance isn't limited merely to speech. The choices we make on stage in movement and gesture and expression all contribute towards the overall effect of a performance, of course, and can drastically alter representation. Just that example we talked about with the baby, that's not in the text, that's a choice. And that could really change how you take away the ending of the play. Like, actions can speak volumes, silences scream. And in this play, silences scream. Lavinia in particular, she's voiceless for much of the play. Yes. But the way we experience Lavinia's voicelessness tells us a lot. And the language of the body is just vital for communication. And when you're confronting an audience with the horrifying and the tragic, I think Shakespeare knows this. And going beyond that Greek drama where we're told something's happened into showing us in all of its horror, when Lavinia enters after the rape and mutilation, it is absolutely shocking. And I think if you're not shocked by that, maybe the director should revisit what they're doing, because it is designed to make us go, oh, and then keep rolling with that. It's unbearable. She's on stage for a long time with Marcus after that moment, which is very hard to witness. Yeah. And yes, there are 14 killings in this play. 9 of them are on stage. There are 6-7 members, 1 rape, 1 live burial, 1 case of insanity, some cannibalism. It's pretty spicy, but none of it's without meaning, because the violence is in the language. And the text is just inundated with imagery and metonymy. It's got these noticeable symbolic image sets, which is quite self-conscious, at times darkly humorous. It feels quite cheeky sometimes, the amount of times hands are mentioned in this play. It's just flooded. And he uses metaphor again and again to foreshadow and to reiterate the physical action of the play. It's absolutely concerned with the mutilation of the human body, the plot that's integral to the plot. And it's a brutal literalization of metaphor, but it means that language and action are really tightly meshed together. So take, for example, the hand metaphor in Act 3, Scene 1, when Aaron tricks Titus into cutting off one of his hands to save the lives of his 2 sons who've been accused of murdering Bassianus, is really crucial in demonstrating linguistic metaphor. You get this dialogue between Titus and Marcus and Lucius, which is all sort of bartering and bargaining, using language, but you're also using their bodies as currency in this moment. It's lend me thy hand and I will give thee mine. And the audience is encouraged to be in on the joke with this, because we've got Aaron giving us wry asides the whole time. The audience is aware of the dramatic irony and what they're witnessing, although Titus isn't, which lends this kind of black humour to the gruesome onstage mutilation. And these uncomfortable kinds of duality are really typical of the whole play. That we see, when Marcus can't quite process what's happened when the 2 sons have been beheaded. He says to Titus, come on, why aren't you going crazy with this? Now is a time to storm. And Titus just laughs. Like, all he's capable of doing at that point is laughter to make sense of this unbearable moment. And we have the scene where the heads of the sons come back on. The scene ends with this brilliant visual example of language being made effective through the body. Each of the surviving members of the Andronici leaves the stage carrying either a hand or a head. And he's got this, even Lavinia, she doesn't have hands, but she is able to take a hand off stage in her teeth, which is quite grotesque, but they're all doing it. It's a real interesting moment there. And you've got the domestic scene later on, the fly killing scene in Act 3, Scene 2, which some people have suggested was authored by Middleton, but let's not go down that road now. It's often referred to as the madness scene. Titus is bothered by a black fly, and Lucius is trying to kill it, and Titus says, oh, don't kill the fly. And then it's drawn to his attention that it's black like Aaron. And he engages in this extraordinary sort of realization that the word and the trope are embedded, and he's going to kill this fly in a kind of ritualistic killing of Aaron, which he can't actually do. But it's fascinating how language also changes when bodies go through changes. So the language, as Titus and his family have understood it, is sort of incapable of changing the situation. So this strange new world in which bodies are changed, they're strange new bodies. Lavinia's body is irretrievably altered. They need new interpretation, new language, new ways to communicate and understand and derive meaning. When Titus says to her, "Speechless complainer, I will learn thy thought. In thy dumb action will I be as perfect as begging hermits in their holy prayers. Thou shalt not sigh, nor hold thy stumps to heaven, nor wink, nor nod, nor kneel, nor make a sign. But I of these will wrest an alphabet, and by still practice learn to know thy meaning." I mean, these are the images which marry words and tropes together. As emblems of the drama, we've got the mutilation, discussion, loss, substitution, create the world of Titus Andronicus, and the way the play kind of rewrites traditional language. Like, obviously, one of the most interesting moments of representation and use of the body in the play is in Act 4, Scene 1, where Lavinia uses a book of Ovid containing the story of Philomela and Tarius to communicate what's happened to her. But she doesn't have any hands. She can't sew it, as they say in a tedious sampler. She can't do that. She's got no method of speech. So she has to use her body in new ways to expose her rapists. She scrawls out the names of Herrin and Demetrius in the dirt by holding a pole in the stumps of her arms and holding it in her mouth, which is so interesting because, yes, she can't speak or write, but she uses her mouth and her hands to reveal her rapists. So it's still the means of her revenge, even though she doesn't have those things anymore. And her body is like this vehicle for telling stories without the use of spoken language, which is something that can only be done on stage in visual theatre.
The key to this is performance, isn't it? So we should encourage everyone not to be put off by the blood and the guts and the gore, and to go and see it in a thoughtful production will bring out much of this.
And I do think it's capable it's possible to do a very thoughtful production, because ultimately it's exploring grief and how we deal with grief. And I think a sensitive portrayal is highly possible in this play. Absolutely, it's possible to play this play as a total parody. And I think sort of its cultural afterlife has perpetuated that. We get things like Vincent Price's Theatre of Blood, where there's a Titus Andronicus reference in the murders there. The critic's two little dogs are whizzed up and fed to him. And that's sort of been its cultural afterlife, hasn't it? That kind of sense. It's very, very gory, very bloody, very scary. We see that in Shakespeare in Love. You've got the youthful John Webster who says, "Oh, my favourite play is Titus Andronicus."
Oh, yes, as he kills a rat. Yes.
Yeah, I liked it when they all died. You know, it's but I think the play literalizing its metaphors makes it a really significant tool, I suppose. Like, the body is that tool. Language is made effective through what we see. Action and metaphor are justified. We're not told about the horrors. We are forced to confront them, sometimes in ways that's really, really difficult to view, depending on how it's been portrayed. I mean, directors have chosen to do this in various different ways over the centuries. But I think possibly the most effective ones are the most brutal, although there was a notable Peter Brook production in which he drew inspiration from kabuki theatre, and all of the blood was represented by red silk ribbons, which came from stumps and heads, which I imagine was very lovely and representative, but I think slightly gets away. There's a tendency to aestheticize, which slightly gets away from the tight connection of the language to what we're seeing there. The way it's probably was performed and possibly is intended to be performed is the word is quite literally made flesh. What we're told, we see. And Shakespeare's blending the power of that imagination with the power of the visual. So speakable and unspeakable are indistinguishable, bearable and unbearable are one. But despite all that, it's also funny. It's gleeful. We're revolted, but we're also delighted. I mean, when Titus says, here they are baked in this pie. We laugh.
We laugh.
And then we think, oh no, why did I laugh? A woman's just cannibalized her children, which is sort of, again, back to that kind of pre-Brechtian theory. It's the slap and tickle. Or I suppose in this case, it's the tickle and slap. You know, you laugh, and then they look at you and say, why are you laughing? It's horrendous. What's wrong with you? One of the but we talked about Lavinia. You talked about Lavinia as this character, this sort of symbolic trope of a particular type of womanhood, and of course, central to the horrific things we witness in this play is her rape and mutilation. A lot of people have found her discovery by Marcus in Act 2, Scene 3 really problematic. And loads of directors choose to cut that scene where Marcus is making sense of what he's saying. Yeah, it's been heavily cut across history, which again, quite ironic given that we're addressing the subject of cutting. But it is long, yeah, but it's, I think, deliberately long. So it is inescapable. And it pushes an audience beyond the simply voyeuristic. We're not going, oh, look, there's a woman with no hands and she's got blood all over her. How horrible. I think we are forced beyond that stage into the slightly meta-theatrical space by the length of this speech. And Marcus it functions a little bit as a choric commentary. We don't see Lavinia's rape. We don't see Karen and Demetrius hack her hands off. So we've kind of got this Greek chorus moment of Marcus telling us what's happened. But Lavinia's on stage with us too. So we see the aftermath. Like, it's probably the first instance where we see that metaphor and language juxtaposed so brutally. Like, the violent action's been established already. We know it's going to happen. Like, Saturninus has referred to even Bassianus running off with Lavinia as rape. We get things like talking about the subtle hole covered in briars on whose leaves are drops of new shed blood. A bit of foreshadowing there of what's about to happen. And the stage direction we're presented with at the beginning of that scene is really definite about what we see. It's enter the Empress' sons with Lavinia, her hands cut off, her tongue cut out, and ravished. Yeah. No room for doubt there. This is what's happened. This is what we see. But we've got this sort of aesthetic of flowing blood. She can't stop. Like, she's called a conduit with 3 issuing spouts. And I think obviously the implications of loss of virginity, her unwillingness to be participating in the spectacle are quite specifically gendered. Like, blood is obviously a dramatic symbol for the sexual violation and psychological violation of a woman by a man specifically. But then we've got this extraordinary speech given by Marcus, which juxtaposes her display of suffering with this lyric monologue, which can feel incongruous. Like, her mouth without its tongue is compared to a crimson river of warm blood, which has no effect at all on her rosed lips and honey breath. You know, her blush of shame is the sun behind a cloud. But I think the poetry of his words allows us to make sense of it a bit more. You know, he says, "Speak, gentle niece, what stern, ungentle hands." It's so cruel because she can't speak and she has no hands. It's savage. But then it taxes Marcus's powers of understanding. And I think in this instance, his highly formalized language is almost that beautiful lyric monologue is a bit of a refuge from grief. And some people have read it as Marcus's attempt to sort of heal Lavinia, put her back together through language, because he can't do it physically. It's been changed beyond repair. And it's Marcus's way of processing what's happened, making sense of it, whereas Titus has got his obsessive program of revenge that he ends up planning. But Marcus sort of sees Lavinia as an emblem rather than a human, and that protects him in a way.
My thanks to Eleanor for her time talking to me and providing such a detailed analysis of Titus Andronicus. It is so interesting to hear about the play more from an actor's point of view, and we agreed that Titus Andronicus is a play that is best appreciated in performance. So next time you get the opportunity, we would both encourage you to get to see the play. Failing that, the BBC production from 1985 is still available on DVD, as is the 1999 film Titus, starring Anthony Hopkins, both of which are well worth a watch and bring out different aspects of the play. And if you haven't discovered the Three Ravens podcast yet, do give Eleanor and Martin a listen. The stories they tell from English folklore are always entertaining and give a real sense of the cultural patchwork that is England's past. I've put links in the show notes for all of that and on the website where you can get a more detailed biography of Eleanor's many theatrical activities. Next time we move on to our second early Shakespeare comedy, Two Gentlemen of Verona. In many ways it's a prototype for aspects of the later comedies that we are more familiar with. And also it's a play that, a bit like The Taming of the Shrew, has its own problems. But it also features a cute dog, so plenty to talk about there. In the meantime, please join the Facebook page or group or find the podcast on Instagram or X to keep up to date with new episodes and other theatre-related things. If you do feel able to help out with the costs of running the podcast, then please head over to Patreon, where you will find additional content for a small monthly fee or a one-off donation. There's also an option to make a one-off donation via Ko-fi.com, which I haven't mentioned for a while, but is a great way to show a little appreciation. You can find details of ways to support the podcast at the New Look website, which is www.thehistoryofeuropeantheatre.com. That's also a great place to get in touch with me if you wish by using the contact form, or you can even leave me a voicemail by clicking on the microphone icon. I look forward to your company next time, but if you do have any comments or concerns in the meantime, you can also contact me by email at thoetp@gmail.com or via X at thoetp.